Okay, I think we'll get started. So let me welcome you to our third David Saurman Provocative Lecture of the Spring. Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm Justin Reitz, and I'm an assistant professor in the economic department. Before I go further, would everyone turn off your electronic alter egos, as one of my colleagues call them, so cell phones, tablets, and so forth, at least on vibrate. So take a few seconds to do that, please. Okay. Also, please join us following the lecture at Flames Eatery at the corner of 4th Street in San Fernando for our meeting, the Barstool Economists. The Barstool is a virtual group of individuals who share economic ideas on the web. It is open to anyone who would like to join us in the Yahoo group. We consider everyone a potential member, so you're all welcome to join us. So beer and pizza after the lecture. The David Saurman Provocative Lecture Series started 17 years ago to foster our vision of higher education, challenging ideas and the development of critical thinking in an environment of respectful intellectual discussion. Let me give a few words about our speaker. John Cochrane is the Rosemarie and Jack Anderson Senior Fellow of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Dr. Cochrane is also a Senior Fellow at Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, Professor of Finance and Economics at Stanford GSB, Distinguished Fellow of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and of the Becker Friedman Institution, a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research and an adjunct scholar of the Cato Institute. So that's just his roles. Now what he's done is even longer. I will try and keep it somewhat brief. His monetary economics publications include articles on monetary policy and the fiscal theory of the price level. He's also written articles on macroeconomics, health insurance, time series econometrics, financial regulation, and a myriad of other topics. I have a whole nother paragraph that goes on. He has written a book on asset pricing and was co-author of the Squam Lake Report. He occasionally writes op-eds, mostly in the Wall Street Journal, and probably how I know him the best, and many of you, is from his blog, The Grumpy Economist, though nothing so far has told me why it's grumpy, but I haven't found that in John yet. So I don't know if that's 100% correct. And for me, and probably other students here are thinking about going on to Ph.D. programs, he's written what I consider the definitive survival guide for time series econometrics in your first year of econometrics in a Ph.D. program. Dr. Cochrane received his Ph.D. in economics from the University of California at Berkeley after having obtained a Bachelor in Science in Physics from MIT. In addition to research and teaching, maybe this is most important, Dr. Cochrane is a competition sailplane pilot and he windsurfs. So I assume that's why he is moving from Lake Michigan to the Pacific Ocean. So I hope you'll relax and listen to Dr. Cochrane as he broadly discusses from an economist viewpoint, taxes, regulation, healthcare, and social program reform. He will provide a question and answer period at the end of the presentation for the audience. With that, I hand over the stage to Dr. Cochrane.
Thank you for that warm and long introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate everyone coming out for something that isn't a required course and you won't be graded on. That's unusual. There's my picture. Good. So I welcome this opportunity to think out loud. This is a moment for me. I've written a lot of essays and blog posts and policy things on various topics, and I'm trying to put them together under a theme. Most people write the book and then go on the tour. I'm lazy about writing, so these occasions to talk to people and get your opinions are very useful to me. So I appreciate you coming, and I hope I will entertain you, if not instruct you a little bit in return. The theme here is lots of the U.S. economy is broke. Our tax code is a mess. April 15th is coming, and it's an annual reminder. Business and labor law and regulations are holding the economy back. Especially the financial, the social programs have a lot of problems. Health care and insurance, as you know, is a problem. And these are just kind of long-standing issues. Now, the economy is finally growing. It seems unseemly to whine when the economy is growing and has been growing. But it could be doing much, much better. In economics, there's the tragedy of the unseen, the things that could be there that nobody knows about except economists. Our economy, we're trundling along at about 2% growth. But as I look at it, I think a lot more is possible and is really important. To give you a sense, I want to give you some sense of why I think things could be better, and that's what this graph is about. Now I got a point, so you gotta listen louder or something of the sort. What I got here on the graph is on the bottom. This is the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. It's a very simple, it's not a very sophisticated concept. But what the World Bank did is survey all the countries in the world, and they ask about 20 questions. These are 20 questions. They're mostly about how easy it is to start and keep going in a small business. But countries where it's hard to start a small business are also countries where it's hard to run a big business. It's a good indicator. And it's stuff like how long does it take to get a building permit? How long does it take? You know, how many different regulatory approvals do you need before you start a grocery store and that kind of thing. So, and it's quantitative. So for each element of the index, 100 is the best one observed somewhere in the world. So there's a tendency with free marketers like us to sit around and drink. We're discussing the perfect cryptocurrency. The tendency to drink beer and discuss perfect things. But 100 is not some free marketer's dream of perfect. 100 in each category is the best thing that's actually observed in some country. Now, no country gets to 100 because each country is, even the ones that are number one on some things are not number one on other things. And on the vertical axis here is GDP per capita, which is, it's not perfect, but it's a rough measure of how well off people are. And it's on a log scale. So we start at 320 and we go up to, well, 320,000, but it's on a log scale so that, you know, moving up a little bit, each movement up here is a percentile, a percentage improvement. Now, you might be patriotic to think the U.S. must be best at everything, but it's not. Notice we're not the best on the Ease of Doing Business Index, and we're certainly not the best at every individual item. So, in fact, a lot of Northern Europe, you may be surprised at this. In the U.S. we kind of envision Denmark and Sweden and so forth as socialist paradises, but they're not. They are in fact they have very high tax rates, but it's much easier to start a business in many ways in those countries than it is in the U.S. The regulatory process is a lot smoother. I think because they figured out that if they want to charge 70% tax rates, they better make it easy to start businesses. If you're going to squeeze the golden goose, you know, let her lay some eggs. The U.S. Is actually number 40 in a lot of indices, in the ranking, a lot of indices of doing business, except for we're number 1 in ease of getting credit. And that's one where we might be a little bit too good in, as we recently found out. And that's what the Ease of Doing Business Index is, and that's GDP per capita. And you can see this strong correlation as you look across countries between GDP per capita and Ease of Doing Business. And I want to emphasize something economists emphasize, which is the level matters, not the growth rate. So, for example, China is a lot in the news these days. China, the roaring economy, it's growing so fast. Wait a minute. China looks like about $8,000 per person of GDP per capita, GDP. U.S., $54,000. Then 8 us 54. So now why is China growing so fast? Because not long ago, they were down here. China looked like North Korea not long ago. And then they opened up and rocketed up. But as the level, they grew fast from here to here. but China is not at all challenging the U.S. in GDP. They're not total GDP, they're pretty big because there's a lot of capitals. But it is still a quite poor country. And that's, we tend to forget that. And if I can go off topic just a little bit, the idea that the U.S. is complaining that we're so poor because these guys are stealing it from us seems a little unseemly once you look at, at the difference between eight and horrible air pollution versus 54. And I should mention, GDP is not, you might say, oh, we got enough stuff, but GDP per capita correlates with health and clean air and longevity and all sorts of things that are much more pleasant about living in the U.S. Than living in China or India, for example. So now, and another prominent one, India, 50 on the Ease of Doing Business Index. It's interesting. I'm a huge believer in democracy, but at least in the long run, it's interesting that a communist dictatorship is able to have much better ease of doing business than the world's largest democracy. And down here we have the Central African Republic. I don't mean to pick on them, but they have the distinction of having the worst ease of doing business in the World Bank's data set. North Korea is not in the data set because obviously they don't let people in to ask questions. They'd probably be down here if they had the chance. So $320 per person per year versus $54,000 per person per year. That's kind of the spread of how we're doing in across the world today. By the way, China moving a billion. We really should wait. China, there's a billion people in China. China moving from here. There's a lot of talk about inequality. Globally, in the last 30 years, has been the biggest decline in inequality ever seen. And that's because a billion people moved out of abject poverty into sort of, whatever you want to call $7,000 a year. Inside countries is different, but across countries, this is just remarkable that China got from there to do. Anyway, back to the topic, which is supposed to be why things could be better. You see this remarkable correlation of ease of doing business, simple measures, very simple measures of how hard it is to start a business and how well off countries are. And even the correlation, I put out Libya, Venezuela, Rwanda, and Georgia. I named them here because the correlation is actually better than it seems. Each of these countries, there's a good reason for it. Libya is in a horrible state of ease of doing business. They're still, and Venezuela is even worse. This is a few years old. It's over here now. They are sitting on a lot of oil, and they used to have a lot of oil wealth. I think we can predict fairly confidently that both Libya and Venezuela's incomes are going to come down. And Rwanda and Georgia are both countries that have recently gotten much better ease of doing business, and presumably will grow. So there's a strong correlation between what can we call it? Sorts of supply side. How free are your markets? How free are your people? How easy is it to do business and wealth? And the magnitude is just astounding. We're talking about 1% here, 2% there, in everything we talk about in the U.S. When you're talking about going from 7,000 to 54,000, that's just night and day. So, and there comes night. There we go. Reminder, go pet your computer once every 5 minutes. Now, to think about could things be better, I thought about Frontierland here. Let's use this correlation and imagine what would a country be like that simply adopted best practices of everywhere in the world. I guess that means the U.S.'s credit market access, much as I have some doubts about that. It might be Denmark's regulatory permitting standards. Just nothing special, just cherry pick country to country the best possible best practices around. That's Frontierland. And if you extend this correlation past the data we've observed, it isn't always a dangerous thing to do in economics, but it's where we start. you come up with about $300,000 per person. So that's my best guess, as if we did not even what would give Justin me a beer and 10 minutes. We'll go out to 120 here, but just adopt best practice in the world. That's let's see, can I do it in my head? From 50 to 300. That's a factor of 6, so a 600% increase. If you want to think in terms of growth rates, well, that could be a hefty growth rate for many, many years as you go from 50 to 300. So, and conversely, if we become more hidebound with, there's this, does regulatory drag really matter? Well, we could go in the other direction, as Libya and Venezuela are swiftly doing. And they just have huge effects. So that's, economists look at levels of things, and we look at what might be, and it's just astounding across the world the extent to which you free up, by simple measures, people's ability to run businesses, the kind of wealth that produces. So that was to get you excited about the topic. Now, what do we actually have to do in the U.S.? What's wrong with the U.S., how we can do it? And here, as I look at our political and economic debates, we don't seem to be getting very far. So my search is a way out of a tired discussion. It's kind of like I don't know if you have some relatives who have been married too long, and she says, you always leave your socks on the floor, and he says, well, but you're always on the phone to your mother, and they just make the same arguments louder and louder. And that's kind of what I sense as I listen to the partisan arguments about economics. We need tax cuts to stimulate the economy. No, you're just giving money to the rich. Cut spending or the deficit will grow a bit. Oh, you heartless person, how could you throw grandma from the train? Louder and louder. And clearly for us, taking one side of this debate and yelling the same things we've been yelling for 30 or 40 years louder still and trying to shove it down the other side's throat is not going to help. But as our job as economists, I think, is to find, to use a tired analogy, the out-of-the-box solution. And that's not hard. When you look at any of the problems facing the U.S., any of the things keeping us on the left, keeping us too much to the left of this and not far enough, I don't want to use left and right, too much in the lower number end of the x-axis and not enough to the higher number end of the x-axis. There are solutions. They're kind of sitting there on the, they are equally appealing or equally angering to both sides of the partisan divide, but they're there. Now, that too seems to get nowhere. I want to create something that will actually get somewhere, and you get free market types around, and we sort of say, oh, here's this third thing that the left and the right aren't thinking about. What a bunch of morons that they're not getting rid of that stupid regulation. And I think that's too facile as well. I think we need to face why is this so hard? Why is our economic policy in quite such a mess? And and there are good reasons for it. And the people in charge are not stupid, and they're kind of stuck. And I think we need to face that fact when we, as citizens, want to, in the end, public opinion is what matters in this country as we find a way out. So here's my little parable for what's wrong with economic policy. It goes like this. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. I think she'll die. I'm not going to sing, but you may remember the tune from being young. So what happened next? She swallowed a spider to catch the fly. I think she'll die. She swallowed a bird to catch the spider, to catch the fly. What happens? I think she'll die. Okay, this was my test. Is anyone awake? And I'm not doing very well. So she goes on, and she swallows a dog, a goat, a cow, and finally to catch the cow, She swallows the horse, and you know what happens then. She died, of course. Okay. So that's the nursery rhyme version of where we're going. Now, what's the point of a nursery rhyme other than to try to amuse you at an evening talk? Our current system and the current impasse we are at in all the big issues does not come from stupidity. We got to the current mess step by step, and each step followed logically as a patch from the previous ones. And that's the little old lady wasn't being dumb. You know, something was itching inside her, and it was perfectly normal. So there's a tendency for economists to say, oh, they don't know how economics works, and sometimes that's true. Starting a trade war has to reflect some not knowing how economics works. But most of the time it's not true. The people who write the laws and regulations, Democrat and Republican, are they have the best interests of the country at heart, and they're kind of stuck. And you can see that. You saw that this summer, last summer, when the Republicans got in charge of Congress, and they had said, we're going to fix Obamacare for 8 years, and then they became the dog that caught the car. And you saw what happened to that one. Same with tax reform. For 8 years, we're going to fix the tax system. They sat down. They were now in charge, both houses of Congress, presidency. And again, the dog caught the car, and we didn't make big changes. So that's the tough news, as I'll show you, is that it's not just that people don't understand, it's that they're stuck from where we go. And when you try to patch the system from where you go, you end up kind of inexorably in this very complicated and not working system. So, but that offers also, once you swallow the story of the little old lady, to really swallow a metaphor there, that leads to the way out. Find the fly. And if we can cough up the fly, then we can get ourselves out of the trouble we're in. And I'll show you those examples. Also, a second theme in what I'd like to advocate, America has become massively complex. We as citizens seem to, and everybody seems to think the federal government is capable of enormous technical competence and exactly managing everything. I just found out that there's a law about how restaurants, there's a federal law about which kinds of employees in restaurants can be tipped and which can't be tipped, and what the rules are for how the ones who can be tipped share their tips with the ones who can't be tipped. And you can go to jail for violating this. I mean, come on. You really think Washington can really figure out the right bargaining power between some and other kinds of restaurant employees? And as you know, if you've tried to fill out your tax, we just have this massive complexity. So my other image is we've become like a hoarder, and the house, our national house, is full of all this junk, and we're sitting around saying, you know, do I really want to keep, which of the 17 sets of glasses do I want to keep? And in some sense, we need to burn it down and start from scratch. Okay, enough preamble. Let me bring that thought to the major topics of economic policy, which are healthcare, tax, banking, regulation, social programs, and we'll probably feel the need for a beer long before I get through all that. Okay. So healthcare. As I told you, Republicans last summer were like the dog that caught the car, and what came out of it, what's coming out of it at best is some little refinements around the edges. And Obamacare itself is, when you look at it, not unusual. They simply took the same ideas. We had heavily regulated healthcare and insurance, the same ideas, and ramped them up a little bit more. It was not unusual. So you can get a sense of, oh boy, there's the horse here because we already had the cow, and it seemed like the only way out. Now, we've all gotten so used to it. Let me remind you of what I think, at least, healthcare and insurance should be like and would be like if we got out of the way. Insurance is supposed to be insurance. It's there to protect your wealth, to protect your pocketbook. Insurance isn't to protect your health. It's if you have a big catastrophic expense, they make sure you don't get poor. Insurance is not about making sure you don't get sick. It's about making sure you don't get poor. So how should insurance work? The same way your car insurance and your house insurance works. It's to protect against catastrophic expenses. Your house insurance doesn't pay for changing light bulbs after you have a discussion with your primary contractor and fax the hardware store 6 copies of your recommended light bulbs. Car insurance doesn't pay for oil changes. It's there to pay for the big stuff. So, that's what insurance should do. Insurance should also, it's individual. Why in the world does your job pay for your health insurance? Out of salary, by the way. The idea that employers pay for it's ridiculous. You would be getting that money in cash otherwise. So why is it tied to employment, where your car insurance and your home insurance is something you buy and take with you from job to job? Health insurance would, in a normal market, work that way too. You would buy it when you're young. Now people, you worry about getting sick. So health insurance would, and did until it was made illegal, have a provision that once you buy it, they can't raise your premiums if you get sick. So you get to keep the insurance. It goes with you as you change jobs, as you move from state to state, and so forth. So it should, in technical terms, health insurance would be and should be lifelong, portable, and guaranteed renewable. Health care, by and large, you would pay for stuff. Along with insurance to pay for the expensive stuff, the same way you do for your car insurance. Most of all, what we should have in health care, which we visibly don't, is lots of innovation and competition. Health care would look a lot like airlines, which, by the way, have a lot of cross-subsidy. So Southwest Airlines goes from here to LA. Some people, well, let's take United. Some people pay business class $1,000. Some people pay $50. It's a little more inconvenient. We all get there safely. There's a lot of cross-subsidy there. Healthcare is a complex personal service like contractors and tax lawyers, and there's no reason that it can't be largely provided by the market. Now we quickly jump to, well, what about the homeless guy with a heart attack? And that's right. A compassionate society needs to take care of the homeless guy with a heart attack. But let's recognize that is a tiny fraction of healthcare expenses. Why should your and my health care and insurance be so screwed up just to solve that problem? Well, why not? Why are we with the crazy system we have? And the fly went back to 1944. And what happened there was the government gave a tax deduction to companies to provide health insurance for their employees. Why did they do that? Well, actually the fly goes back earlier. There were price controls in World War II that stopped companies from raising wages to attract employees. And the company said, we need something to get people in the door here. So the government said, okay, we don't want you to raise wages because that would violate price controls, but you can give them health insurance for free. Now already, and there's a glitch in that law, because this was back in the old days, by the way, health insurance didn't really matter because it was about, you got a broken arm, we'll set your arm. You get cancer or diabetes or any of the stuff that's expensive now, and you just die quietly. So health insurance wasn't really a big deal back then. So what happened, and the glitch was they only allowed the deduction for employer-based plans. If the employer said, oh, you already have health insurance, well, I'll help you pay for it, no tax deduction for that. And we're stuck with that today. If you do the right thing and buy your own health insurance, your employer can't pay for it with pre-tax money, and so nobody does. So we got two problems right away. One is the minute something's a tax deduction, now we have all sorts of incentives to put stuff under the tax deduction. If the employer says, oh, I'll pay for your Band-Aids, then we don't have to pay income tax on your Band-Aids. If you looked up your income tax lately, that's a nice savings. So that's why we got first dollar health, quote, insurance, unquote, out of a system that economics does not give you first dollar coverage in the same way you don't, if you didn't have to pay income taxes on your oil changes, car insurance would pay for oil changes as well. You'd just be paying for it in the premiums ahead. So first we get that distortion, and that created in itself the pre-existing conditions problem. So the pre-existing conditions problem is a genuine economic problem, and that's what a lot of why does the government interfere in our health insurance is because of, now why do you have pre-existing conditions problem? Well, The minute there's employer-based health insurance, anyone who loses their job, if they're sick, and by the way, you tend to be sick when you lose your job, now is out of health insurance, and since they're sick, no one's willing to give them insurance because the event already happened. A young person offered, let's buy some health insurance that sticks with you and will stick with you even if you get sick. Well, why bother with that? Because the minute you get a job, your employer is going to, quote, pay for it, unquote. So that killed the guaranteed renewability of health insurance, which is what we have in life insurance. It's a perfectly natural feature, but it got sick. So, okay, where are we up to? The fly, we just did the bird and the spider and the bird. Now let's eat the goat. What do we do about the pre-existing conditions problem? Sit yourself down. You're not, and you're stuck in this. You're stuck with this. What do? Well, you just pass a law that says health insurers have to give everyone the same price. You're not allowed to charge some people more than other people because it's unfair, and you got this pre-existing condition problem. But you can see that's community rating. Everyone pays the same. But now we got another problem. Well, if everyone pays the same price, then healthy people say, what the heck? I'll just skate on it, and if I get sick, I'll pay for it out of pocket. Sick people say that's a great deal, and then they all sign up. Yeah, we got to patch again. Maybe patching the boat would be a better analogy. Or what are we up to? We're eating goat at this point. So now what we got to do is have mandates. So one thing insurance companies would do is they would say, well, here's cheap insurance that doesn't cover much for you healthy people. But then the only insurance sick people can get is extremely expensive. So no, all health insurance must provide blah, blah, blah. And an individual mandate. Every individual must buy health insurance, and if it's overpriced, well, tough luck. That's how we do it. Insurers then, of course, try to get out of this bad deal. They try to not cover the things that sick people like. So we'll fix your broken bones, but we'll try not to fix your expense. So we have to have regulators forcing them to do stuff they don't want to do. I heard a great story of a Medicare Part D insurer who said, yeah, we take everybody same price. Come on and sign up. Oh, by the way, you have to sign up in person, and it was three stories up with no elevator. Well, that's a good way to get a better pool. So there's another original sin of health insurance, which is our country is averse to taxing and spending, which is fine, except then it tries to do it by other worse ways. If you noticed, if you go into a hospital, it's impossible to find a price on anything, right? They will not tell you how much this thing is going to cost. If you do see a price, it's absolutely a ridiculous price, and you can tell. I went to see my my doctor just for a regular checkup. The bill was $2,500. Insurance discount $750. It's all phony baloney stuff. Why is it impossible to just pay cash? I mean, my dog goes to the vet, and we just pay cash. If you want to see, by the way, free market health insurance, go get plastic surgery. Insurance doesn't pay for it, and you just go, you pay cash, and you don't have to wait 6 weeks either. Well, why don't we have that system? Why is it impossible to pay cash? Why won't they even tell you how much it costs? Well, again, our government wants to subsidize, which is a good thing to do, subsidize health insurance for people who can't afford it, and for sick people and unfortunate people and so forth. But it doesn't want to do the natural thing, which is to rate, everybody pony up some tax money, and we're going to give you some free health care, because that would look like taxes. So what we do instead is we say, we'll sneak it in. What we'll do is we'll pass laws that say hospitals have to treat these people for free. And hospitals say, well, that's nice. And we also so Medicare and Medicaid don't pay anywhere near what the actual cost is. So we kind of force hospitals to take low-price patients that we want to subsidize. And hospitals say, yeah, great, but we're going to go bankrupt. So what do you got to do? Well, then you got to overcharge everybody else and cross-subsidize. The hospital says that's fine, but you can't allow competition in this business, because if there's competitive business, another hospital comes in and says, well, I'm grabbing the healthy, the ones you're overcharging, I'll go give them a better deal, and then we've stripped away the cross-subsidies. So a thing we do all over in the US is in order to subsidize someone, rather than just forthrightly paying for it and subsidizing that person on budget where we can see it and decide if it's a useful thing to do, we hide it in some complicated cross-subsidy scheme where if you have private employer-provided health insurance, you're paying about twice as much as you should be in order to subsidize everybody else. It's the same thing as taxing and spending. We have the same real tax rates as Europe does. We just hide it in overpriced stuff that we then use to cross-subsidize. Well, what does the government do? Stop competition. And that's why if hospitals offered you a competitive rate, then the insurance company would say, no, I get to pay that rate too. And then all of a sudden they don't have any money to cross-subsidize the other stuff. And if the government allowed clinics to come in, the hospital wants to charge $1,000 for an MRI, well, I'll put in MRIs R Us right next door to it and charge $200. Well, then the hospital wouldn't be able to. So you got to stop that competition. So that's the big problem. Economic growth comes from innovation and competition, and we use forced subsidies to stop competition. Well, you can see in both cases what we have to do is you can see what happened. And this lesson is one that we've learned over and over. So I can see some of you are old enough, as I am, to remember what regulated telephones and airlines looked like. There was one phone company. It was pretty terrible. Long-distance calls used to be really expensive. When I was a kid, we never did it because it was like $5 a minute. That was to cross-subsidize landlines. And in return, there was no competition. There was one phone company in the whole country. Well, we got rid of that system because what happens is it's so inefficient. It starts as the same as taxing and spending, but then once you protect something from competition, you protect it from innovation, and then everybody's paying more than they should. That's where we are with healthcare. We've transferred stuff by this cross-subsidy scheme, but it's gotten so inefficient that now we're all paying way more than we ought to be. And that's got to break down. And it broke down in telephones, it broke down in trucking and airlines, and we stopped trying to do this cross-subsidy thing. So, how do we get out of this? Go back, cough up that fly. The key thing is it's not going to work to find some patch at the edge. If you take as given the employer-provided health insurance, the hospitals which cross-subsidize Medicare, Medicaid from paying insurance, you're stuck. There's no patch. The Democrats came in and tried to patch, and they came up with this crazy quilt Obamacare. The Republicans came in and tried to patch up the patch, and they said, after 8 years of screaming how easy it would be, they discovered that they've got the same problem. You got to go back and start from the beginning. And if you want to subsidize stuff, it's much more efficient to just forthrightly tax and spend on budget than to try to hide it by making some people pay more than other people. Let's go into banking. Same story, different actors. What you mean, banking is a topic that is sure to put an audience to sleep when they're in any talk, but try to hang in there because it's really important. As I think it was John Dillinger said, that's where the money is. And we just recently had this Dodd-Frank thing, this huge financial regulatory act, which needs to be thought about. We have a fairly uncompetitive banking system now. So what happened? And we also had a financial crisis. The most important thing is, 10 years ago, we had a huge financial crisis. We lost 10% of GDP. Unemployment went up over 10%. 20 million Americans lost their jobs, and we sat there for a long time. We are only really now, 10 years later, in some sense recovered from that event. That was bad. Let's not do that again. So the big thing the financial regulation has to do is to stop that from happening again. And if you think that just what they've done is stop, this problem has been with us since about 1350. The first bank was about 1340. The first bank crisis was about 1350. I'm making up the dates, but am I close enough? Yeah, within the right centuries. So we need a system that's going to stop that from happening again. So what happens? Let's go back to when we ate the fly here. 1932 was the most recent really big bank run, the Great Depression. And what happens, all financial crises are very, very simple. All the articles you read about credit default swaps and toxic derivatives and so on and so forth, that's involved, but the fundamental mechanism, if you've seen Mary Poppins, and little Michael says he wants his tuppence back, and they won't give him his tuppence, and the lady outside says, "What? They're not giving him his tuppence back? I want all my money." And she runs to get it all too. And the bank fails. There's a run on the bank. Or Jimmy Stewart in the Great Depression, and everyone wants his money back. Yeah, these are cute, but that's exactly what happened in 2008. Okay, it happened with broker-dealers and derivatives contracts, but the mechanism was the same. So what is it that causes a bankrupt? There's a fundamental problem with the way banks have been run for hundreds of years. And the problem is not the things that banks invest in. We tend to say, oh, all these subprime mortgages, they were so dangerous. Subprime mortgages are an amazingly safe asset. It's debt, after all. And, maybe even 5% of the people don't pay back. Then you get the house and you can sell it off. Compare the riskiness of a diversified pool of subprime mortgages to the riskiness of, what's Elon Musk up to these days? Investing your money in rocket ships to Mars. Or we don't even have to go crazy like that. Investing your money in the self-driving cars. Or even investing your money in building a new Walmart. Any corporate asset is just tremendously more risky than subprime mortgages. And yet, where is there an army of regulators monitoring risk? They're monitoring bank assets, which are the most boring, safest assets in the economy. Now, why is that? Well, for some reason, when banks lose money, we have a financial crisis. And when Ford or GM lose money, I was trying to think of somebody loses money, we don't have a financial crisis. And there's a reason for that, because banks largely borrow their money. And they borrow their money short term. They offer depositors, you can have your money back anytime you want, first come, first serve. So if I'm your bank and you think I might be in trouble, you have every incentive to come run and get your money out before the next person gets their money out. Only the first 10 people are going to get their money. So come get it, boom, bank fails. Bank runs are a problem of short-term debt. When you think back about the previous bust, which was the tech bust, way more money was lost in the tech bust, yet there was no crisis. Why not? Suppose you've bought a tech stock and you learn, guess what? It was all vaporware. It's not going to work. Too bad. Your stock has fallen from 100 down to 10. What can you do about it? Go home. You can have a whiskey. You can be mean to the dog. But that's it. Your money's gone. You could sell the stock at 10, but your $100 is gone. If it were a bank, you have the right to go to the bank and say, I want my $100 back now. And if you don't give it to me by tomorrow morning, I can grab all of your assets and close you down. So the problem is not that banks invest in risky stuff. They invest in safe stuff. The problem is that banks borrow a huge amount of money to do it. Banks, Lehman Brothers, before it went down, it was invested in subprime mortgages. It had, for every dollar of its own money that it was investing, it had borrowed 29. And it borrowed it overnight. So every morning you walk into your job at Lehman Brothers, and the first thing you do is you find $29 of new money. You have to borrow $29 from new people to pay off $29 to the people who lent you the money yesterday. Every single day. And one day, there weren't $29 of new people, and the thing went under. No surprise. So financial crises are always about runs, and runs are always about things that look like bank deposits. Overnight repo, broker, dealer. It turns out they all look like bank deposits. They have this first come, first serve. So what do you do about it? It's 1932. Clearly, we just had a big, let's not have this happen again. How do you fix this problem of bank runs? Well, one way to go about it is what we chose to do in 1932. bail out the depositors. Now, we use the word bailout all the time. The bailout almost never goes to the company. The companies fail. The bailout is of the people who are owed money by the company. If we're starting a run, if you guys are all running for the exits because somebody said you can get your money back, the way for me to calm you down is say, wait, you don't have to, I'm good for it. I, the government, will guarantee all of your debts. That stops the run. And that's what we did. We put in deposit insurance. That was going to be our mechanism for stopping banks run. And it works. You can, no matter, if you are sitting in the hot seat at the next, if you become the Treasury Secretary for the next financial crisis, and there's a run happening, there's one and only one thing you can do to stop it: bail out everybody who's owed money. And that's what deposit insurance does. Now, that's a problem. You can see that's a problem. If you say banks can borrow money, but the government will always pay back the money if there's any problem with it, you've just created two huge problems. First of all, the depositors no longer have any need to worry about if the bank is safe or not. Back in the old days, people were really careful about which bank they put their money in, and they wanted to make sure the banks had skin in the game, and they wanted to know what kind of assets they were investing. Now, who cares? Government's going to pay me back. So the monitoring by depositors vanished, and then the incentive on the bank's end. If you can get people, and the government's going to bail out your debts, well, that's like sending cousin Luigi off to Las Vegas with your credit card. The polite way of saying that, it's an incentive to excessive risk-taking. So what do we do about that? Well, we throw in bank regulators. Now, we need to have bank regulators to make sure that the banks don't take too many risks, because the depositors aren't doing it and the banks have an incentive to do it. What we also do, again, notice, what we have to do is stop competition. Because banks in this situation would easily, well, the government's good for the debts. Hey, he's offering you 2% for your money. I can offer you 5% for your money, and then I'll go sneak it into some risky thing. So you have to stop competition among the banks, and that's exactly what they did. They said banks can't offer, they had to offer 0% interest on checking accounts and deposits. Sorry, not allowed to pay interest. No competition. Back when I was a kid, when banks were trying to get you to come, and what they did is they gave you toasters instead of paying you interest. Now they pay you interest. But again, stopping competition stops the engine of innovation. And so banking really didn't change from 1935 until about 1982. And we need an innovative banking system, just like we need an innovative everything else. And then we played this cat and mouse game for many years. Over and over again, the banks would figure out some clever way to take a risk and lose money. The government would bail out one class of creditors and then say, a bigger class of creditors, and then say, never again, throw on some more regulations. The banks would figure out a way around it. Another class of creditors would get bailed out, and we do the same. The continental Illinois crisis, the savings and loan crisis, the Latin debt crisis, long-term capital management, Bear Stearns, which in the spring of 2007 failed. The government bailed it out, said never again. Now we've saved the financial system. That was February of 2007. It didn't work. And now where we are is that basically, they may say no, that basically all bank debt is guaranteed by the government, all the big banks, and it's turned into regulated utility. I'm willing to bet that we'll have the same 7 big banks 20 years from now that we have now, just as we had the same airlines in 1979 that we had in 1935. There is now every decision by every big bank. There's about 150 regulators inside every big bank saying watching every decision. And the weeds, fintech is growing up on the side. Financial innovation always finds ways, and is that finding a way around regulation? I have lots of great stories about how clever MBAs work their way around the last regulations, or is it giving us a better system? I don't know. It's one of the two. What you can see here is that each step is inevitable. When a run comes, you guarantee debts, you increase regulations. So what Dodd-Frank Act did was not a new, terrible, crazy, socialist, whatever idea. It was just exactly more of the same. So how do we get out of that? Well, there's another way. It was another way that was considered in the 1930s. It was turned down in the 1930s. And I think for good technical reasons. But now technology lets us out. And it's this. Banks, if they're going to invest in anything risky, must get their money by issuing shares, not by borrowing short term. They can issue shares or they can borrow long term. Banks have to get their money the way every other company gets its investment money, in a way that when the bank loses money on its assets, the value of its liabilities falls transparently, and people can't run and close the thing down. I like to call it equity finance banking. And we can do that now. You could buy your water. If you swipe a card to buy your water, do you care if what you're transferring is a bank account, or that the account that you're transferring pays higher interest but has a little bit of price risk? For example, suppose that what you swipe is a mutual fund that holds mortgage-backed securities and whose price goes up from $98, $99, $101. You might lose down to 97 someday. Fluctuates up and down a little bit. But you have no right to go get your original dollar out. We've solved the problem. And now we can do it. You couldn't do that in 1933. You couldn't swipe anything. Selling a security was a hard business. So we can do completely equity finance banking and have essentially no regulation. The only bank regulation you'd need is the same regulation you have for your other countries. No fraud. Your accounting statements are verified and so forth. But you would not need an army of regulators checking that every business decision is a safe and sound one. And really, it's the only way out, because we've tried the other one. And there is some hope that this thought is actually in Washington. The Fed is more and more moving to lots of capital for banks. There's been some proposals in the House that didn't yet pass the Senate, but the idea that we need to cure the centuries-old problem of bank liabilities and not have to regulate bank assets is there. And Jeb Hensarling, who is now unfortunately leaving, had a brilliant idea. As we think about fixing anything, we always go to, let's fix the old ones. How do we fix J.P. Morgan and Chase and Bank of America and all the big ones? No. Why don't we just allow an on-ramp? You guys, if you're happy with Dodd-Frank and regulation, go for it. If you want to conduct your business with lots more equity, we'll let you off the regulations. And if you guys want to start a new fintech business and not have to have a $100 million compliance department to do it, we'll let you on board. The one key is no demand deposits, no short-term lending. You got to find investor money for all the stuff you want to do. Allow a vision. That's the one big thing missing in the Dodd-Frank Act. How can I set up my business to be a good boy and not a systemic risk? Not in any of the thousands of pages. But again, there's no small ways out. Once you're into this thing of we're going to stop runs with bailouts and regulate risks, you're done. Taxes, as April approaches, let us talk a little bit about taxes. Our tax code is insane. There's like $100,000 of tax code, 100,000 pages of tax code, millions of pages of regulations. It's absurdly complex, and I think it's hurting our democracy. Sooner or later, people are going to start understanding how rich people are getting away with murder. That you need. Any vaguely wealthy person has an army of tax lawyers. When you look, why does every sports star have a charitable foundation? It's a tax dodge. Why just any average person, if you have any estate issues at all, you need some system of complex trusts. And everybody's running to DC for special deals. So how can we fix this? Well, let's go back to, as always, we're going to go back to basics here. First thing is that the first point of taxes should be to raise revenue with minimum damage to the economy. And economists sometimes will violate this rule. Economists have very little standing to tell you how much taxes you should pay and how much taxes you shouldn't pay. Some economists on the right tend to say it's terrible that people have to pay so much taxes, but as a matter of fact, economics says very little about the rate of taxation. What economics says a lot about is marginal taxes. If you work another hour and generate $50 worth of value, how much of that do you keep? If the marginal tax rate is high, then you have a disincentive to work. So the key for economics is to get you to pay as much taxes as possible. We've got to finance this government, but at the lowest possible marginal rate. So for example, let's think about, suppose you make $100,000 and we want to raise $50,000 in taxes. Here's one way to do it. Pay half of your income to the government. All right, so you're going to make $100,000, you're going to pay $50,000 to the government, tax rate's a half, government gets $50,000. Here's another way to do it. We'll exempt the first $50,000 of taxes, or we'll give you a write-off for your solar panels and your mortgage interest or whatever, and then we'll charge you 100% on the next $50,000. So how much does the government make? Well, you make $100,000, government gets $50,000. The same, right? No, wait a minute. It's not the same. Because if I tell you whatever you earn, you pay half to the government, you might make $100,000. If I tell you the first $50,000 is yours, after that the government takes everything, you go on a 20-hour work week. Why should you bother working the rest of the time? The marginal tax rate is the disincentive to work. So our job is to find a tax system with the lowest marginal rates, yet that raises the money the government needs to do the things we want it to do. The way to do that is you trade off. You create a tax code that has low rates, but trades off by all the deductions, exclusions, credits, and all the other stuff is gone. And that's fairly easy to do. Now, again, we like to pretend. We like to pass laws that say there's a high rate, and then rich people with very good lawyers can actually not end up paying the taxes. So what you get is the worst of all worlds. You get all the distortions and none of the tax revenue. So if you ask an economist the question, how should we structure a tax code to raise revenue for the government with the minimal possible distortion, the answer is going to be basically burn the whole thing and have a broad-based consumption tax. I like the idea of a value-added tax, no income tax, no corporate income tax, no estate tax, no anything else, just a flat value-added tax. You want simplicity? That tax code is done. It's completely burned. It's gone. You want and none of the incentives to go to Washington to get some special deduction for income tax. Now, that's a little bit wild, but why don't we do that? Again, we're kind of stuck in the little old lady. The decision to tax income really was the fly. Once you start taxing income rather than consumption, once you start trying to tax how much people make rather than how much they spend, then you're stuck. The minute you tax personal income, you have to tax corporate income. Why? Because people are very good at incorporating themselves if you don't. We want to tax consumption. We don't want to tax investment. But the minute you tax people's income rather than just tax their consumption, you have to tax their investments because people are very good at calling what used to be called income. Instead of calling it wages, we'll call it stock options. Oh, all of a sudden it's an investment. So you got to tax corporate income. You got to tax income. And the next thing you know, we're at this mess that we are now. Again, the original sin, there's many original sins with I'm going to mix my metaphors, with taxes. We're also trying to do way too much at once. We're trying to raise revenue for the government, transfer income, which I'm all for transferring income. Let's just do it with checks instead, rather than hidden in the tax code. We're trying to subsidize all sorts of worthy and unworthy causes. My neighbor has a Tesla. I live in Palo Alto. My neighbor has a Tesla. I looked up his house on Zillow. It's worth about $4 million. The taxpayers are giving him $15,000 to buy his cute little sports car. That's a straight out subsidy in the tax code that if voters knew about, they might be mad about. So we're trying to break up what you're trying to do into the individual components, and I think we'll get a simpler system. So conclusion. I'll skip regulations. We can talk about them in questions if you'd like. I think there's the same approach to social programs. Reform them, not cut them. Our problems are not easy. There's a tendency to say, oh, the problems are easy. There are easy solutions. They're sitting up on the shelf. I gave you some of them. But you can't get there by little patches. You have to go back to the basics, figure out what you're trying to do. And that makes it difficult. Now, it's there, it's possible. And I think that's the challenge. People in D.C. are not stupid. They understand this, but they are kind of stuck in patches. If we don't do it, the end of empire looms. Great civilizations come and go, and they usually go under a pile of paperwork. And so we got to do now. How do you do it? Many people say, "Oh, we need some smart people in Washington to do this." No, we have smart people in Washington. They understand this, but they also want to get reelected. So the number one place is for us to demand. Guys, sit down together. This stuff is on the plate. You got to clean it up. It's going to be hard, and we'll vote for you if you do. Okay, that's enough of remarks. How about some questions? Well, I didn't know I can do this. I'm Oprah now. Well, I'm glad to see I answered all the world's problems and just in a completely uncontroversial way.
Hi, thank you for being here. Oh, wow, this is really loud. Thank you for being here today. My question is about the banks and how they're insured by the government. So I think I found that out in high school, but it's like $200,000 something dollars. So from your graph, it says the average American makes 30 from 50K per person, right? Is that correct to say?
Close enough for question purposes.
Yeah. So my question was, why don't they lower the amount of how much money is insured if the average American only makes that much, and accounting for how much they have to pay for food and everything, they don't really have a lot of money in the bank account.
Yeah, the average American doesn't have 250 grand. And in fact, it started out much lower. Now, the problem is you want to stop a run. So this isn't about justice or equity or helping out the little guy. This is about stopping a bank run. And unfortunately, you got to stop the people from the people with the money are the ones likely to run to the bank and get the money. Why did they put limits in on all might be a question. And the answer is they thought that wealthy people and corporations should be bearing the risk and paying attention to the banks and supplying some of the discipline. And in fact, what happened in the financial crisis was that corporations have a lot more than 250 grand. And they don't put it in banks because they don't want to lose it if the bank goes under. So this whole shadow banking system was invented for corporations to invest their idle cash and not have to worry about the banks going down. And they invented some cool stuff, overnight repo, which was almost cool enough, but not quite cool enough. The problem with lowering the amount of deposit insurance is that, then you're back to the problem that people with more money run to get it out at the first sign of difficulties.
But those people would be corporations, right? So couldn't you make a separate account for corporations and then another account for the average American?
Yeah, they still, you could, but the corporations can run to the bank, pull their money out, and then the bank fails. I think where we'll go, I think what you have is an excellent idea. My vision of banks that are not allowed to say, give me your money and you can always come back and get it anytime you want, we'll limit that to 50 grand a person. And that's actually quite sensible. Very small, if banks want to offer deposits to small people insured, great. Corporations are sophisticated enough that if you want to put 250 grand in the bank, then the value of that account can float just like a stock, and that's a good proposal. That would be a good limiting deposit insurance, and requiring the other stuff not to look like a deposit would be a great way of solving the problem.
Okay, thank you.
We go to the
Yes, I have a two-part question.
Okay, one at a time because I can't remember two parts at once.
All right.
I'll give you two questions.
They're related, but when you don't economists define income as consumption plus a change in net worth? That's called Haig-Simmons income. So if you tax consumption, you're really taxing income when you spend it rather than when you earn it. And if I can do a second part. wouldn't you get a zero marginal tax rate if you taxed land value, which Milton Friedman said was the least worst tax? Would you agree with that?
No.
And
These questions are easy so far.
if alternatively, if you tax the capacity to get income rather than the actual income, that would have a marginal tax rate of 0 too.
How are you going to tax the capacity?
Well, a
get
doctor can earn $200,000 a year. You tax him based on what he could earn, whether he earns it or not. Then there's zero marginal tax rate because it's not
very
based on his current actual income.
This is what's fun about being an economist. So let me start with the last one. Why I don't like that one. So we focus a lot in thinking about tax policy on the disincentive to work.
Yeah.
And what you're pointing out is if I say every doctor, you're going to pay 50 grand. No, you're going to pay, 150 grand, whether you work or not, then the doctor's incentive to work is unchanged. Sounds brilliant, right? The first problem is if the doctor said, screw it, I'm not working, come get the money, then you have a problem with that. The other problem is the incentive to go to medical school. And this is the real problem of progressive taxation. It's not so much, it's quite well proven that if you tax the rich and put in very high marginal tax rates for high incomes, people keep working. They scale back a little, but they keep working. But what they don't do is put in those years and years of medical school and residency to become a doctor in the first place. So just to reveal to the rest of you there's a deep principle going on here. What you want to do when you're taxing, the problem is, in the minute you tax anything, you get less of it. So you want to try and tax things that people can't avoid by some offsetting behavior. If you tax hours of work, then people don't work so much. What we're trying to do here is find a tax that you have to pay whether or not you work. The problem is when you tax being a high income person, being a highly educated, well, let's tax degrees, right? Stanford degrees have to pay a huge tax. Well, then people go to San Jose State or cheaper places that don't get taxed as much.
Yeah.
Which
What about
you might get just as good an education and you don't pay the tax.
So what's wrong with the land tax?
Okay, well, you asked 3 questions. You gave me time for 3 answers.
Yeah.
Land tax, just to fill everybody else in. The idea behind the land tax, again, we want to try to tax something that people can't escape. The best tax was explained to me in graduate school as a tax on kidney dialysis machines. Because when you need a kidney dialysis machine, you need it, and you're going to pay anything for it. So we'll just tax the wazoo out of kidney dialysis. If you don't get it, you're going to die. That's the way it works. Well, it's a good joke because you know why we don't do that. So the land tax is advertised as a similar thing. There's only so much land. You can't make more land, and you can't not make land. If we tax the land, then it's supplied anyway, so it's fixed. The problem is there's this vision. The land tax comes out of 17th century England. And the vision is just there's the land, and then any land is the same as any other land. You put wheat on it, and you get stuff. But so there's land in the U.S. the land in Winnemucca, Nevada, has a slightly different value than the land in Palo Alto. And the idea of the land tax is you only tax the land, you don't tax the improvements. You don't tax people's efforts to build houses on it, to build buildings on it, and so forth. Therefore, you're not disincentivizing all those improvements. But the value of land in Palo Alto is higher than the value of land in Winnemucca, Nevada, precisely because of all the improvements on it. So I don't think there is this. I mean, if we tax everything at the value of land in Winnemucca, Nevada, fine, but you're going to get 10 cents an acre out of that.
Yeah, that's why it's a land value tax, not a land acre tax.
But now you've lost the reason for it, because the reason land has value is because of all the improvements people have put into it. So now it's just a property tax. So now a land value tax is the same as in California. A land value tax is a property tax because the houses are basically worthless. It's all the value of the land. Did you have the first one, or are we getting on too long here? Oh, consumption. Yeah, right.
You tax consumption, you're taxing income when it's spent, right?
Yes, which is exactly the right thing to do. We don't want to give people an incentive to eat it now versus eat it later. What you do with an income tax is you say artificially, eat it now, because if you invest it, we're going to tax it. So we give you an incentive to eat it now rather than eat it later. The whole point of a consumption tax is we want to give you an incentive to invest, create a factory, hire some people, and then you get to eat more later. We don't want to tax away that incentive. But yes, and I think you get more money out of people if you get them. There's all sorts of games about income taxes, but if you catch them at the Ferrari dealer, you're going to get them.
Thank you.
Yeah, this side.
Thank you for the lecture. It was very informative. I just wanted to ask, specifically for the consumption tax, why a value-added tax rather than like a general sales tax? And you might want to make a distinction of what a value-added tax is, because not everyone here is an econ major.
Yeah, I was trying to be fast. So if you're going to have a sales tax, the problem with sales tax is people try not to pay it. And businesses try to sneak away and not pay the sales tax. The way a value-added tax works is that it's charged at every stage of production. So if you're a business, businesses don't pay sales tax now, but you have to pay the value-added tax to your suppliers, and then you collect the value-added tax when you get it, and then you can deduct what you paid your suppliers from what you collect on the other end. And it's a kind of a self-reinforcing mechanism. If you sneak out, if you charge cash and don't collect the sales tax, then you don't get to deduct. Then you've already paid essentially the sales tax on your suppliers, so you lose that incentive. So that's why I think value-added taxes are cleaner than sales taxes. And he left, so no follow-up. Oh, there you are. That side.
Quick question. If we were to migrate to a consumptive tax system, how do you guard against rampant bartering under the table and whatnot?
Yeah, that's part of the advantage of the VAT, because everybody has an incentive to collect it so that they can deduct the VAT they paid. Yeah, tax systems require some enforcement. And that's, Europe has high taxes and they have a lot of cash and a lot of bartering. And so it needs an enforcement mechanism. I think it doesn't need quite as much enforcement mechanism as it does, as an income tax does, especially as we move to electronic transactions. So it's harder and harder to hide, especially large purchases from the federal government. And as things become more and more electronic, and as the government cracks down on cash, I think that's actually fairly straightforward to monitor. It's not painless to monitor. All laws, you got to have cops out there. Thank you.
Hi, so my question is about health insurance.
Yeah.
So earlier in your lecture, you mentioned that health insurance is actually to make sure you don't get poor, rather you don't get sick. And so my knowledge of health insurance is very limited in a sense, especially on TV when you see debates regarding universal health care, especially specifically Senator Bernie Sanders and all that stuff. So my question is, would the United States be better off with universal health care or stick to the premiums and all that sort?
Short answer, no. But these are code words, and you have to unravel what they mean. What does universal or single payer healthcare mean? What are you really talking about that when you say that? Because there's lots of different visions. One vision is that there is a universal public option. So, we got this problem of very poor people and very sick people, and we want to take care of them. And there's a public hospital or a public insurance that they can use. And that on top of that, however, you and I are allowed to get fancier, and that's, it's going to be what, we decide we can afford to provide. But on top of that, you and I are allowed to buy better health care and insurance, and doctors are allowed to treat us in fancier places. Because in the end, we're becoming a richer and richer society. The idea that healthcare costs are a big problem, in general, we should blow up. What else are you going to spend your money on? As we become richer and richer, do you really want 5 cars and 10 TV sets? The idea, that the best thing that we could do with our money is spend it on health. The problem is we're getting bad value for our money, not that we're spending too much money on healthcare. So if what you mean by, I'm going to be Clinton-esque, define universal. If that's what you mean by universal, it's arguably a better system. Now we're down to how do we provide charity care? Do you provide Medicaid, where the government runs an insurance company and then farms it out to private doctors with a lot of rules and a lot of limits on competition? Do you provide a system of public hospitals where the government directly provides care? Do you give people a voucher and then, go buy yourself some health insurance? Those are, I think, those are good debatable questions on each end. What often is meant by universal health insurance is, however, not only we will provide for people who need it, but we will outlaw anybody else doing another system. So doctors may not, on pain of going to jail, treat you and charge you money for it. You may not buy anything better than what's offered. I think that would be a bad idea, in part because health is like everything else, and we live in a time of enormous innovation. And the way the iPhone works, isn't the iPhone great? How does it work? They come in and it comes out, they charge a ton of money, and rich people get it, and that funds all the development costs, and then next thing you know, it is true that the homeless guy under the tracks in Palo Alto has an iPhone, which is a great thing, but he wasn't the first one to get an iPhone. And that's the way that's the way innovation is going to work, that wealthy people get it first and pay through the nose to do it. But if we have a system where you're not allowed to opt out of the system, that innovation will go. And that's, I think, the central tragedy. I mean, I want, above anything else, above how do we tend to talk about how do we pay for 1950s healthcare. Above anything else, you're on the cusp of you might live forever. I'm too old for that. But if we figure out the microbiome and genetics, it's just unimaginable what we can do. But that takes money, and that money's got to come from somewhere. And I know one recipe for where it comes from, and it's not. That's not. The government tells you exactly what everybody gets, and no one's allowed out of the system. Yeah.
So I see some parallels between the government securing bank debt, thus increasing them to make more risky investments, and government subsidization of student loans and securing them. So if you've given it much consideration, which sounds like maybe you have, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the ballooning of student loan debt, sort of where you think we might be going and what the potential solutions might be.
Boy, you're asking me to walk into a very knowledgeable and hostile crowd about student loan debt. Yeah, so graduating with a ton of debt isn't a great idea. I'd actually be more, I could react to better ideas better on that one than provide them. I'm just going to give you an I don't know. Is that a good way to end? I don't know the answer to everything. Oh, no, we have one more.
Okay.
Two more. I don't
All
get
right.
off that easy. Well, I'll get to mull over student debt if I can think of some better answers. Yeah.
Okay. On the question of
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought of one answer, student debt. I'm worried about the answer that is currently that you get to not pay it back if you go into low-paying businesses, because the point from the federal government of subsidizing student debt was to have people take painful, unpleasant degrees like computer science that then raise incomes and pay back a lot of taxes. So I think there's incentive problems there. There's also incentive problems. Universities are anti-competitive and have massively ballooned their fees. A lot of what we're doing by subsidizing debt is just raising professor salaries. Yeah, go.
Okay. On the question of tax on the site value of land, unimproved land, right? I don't think you can be quite as dismissive as you have of the proposals from Adam Smith on to Milton Friedman. There's been general agreement by economists over 250 years that a tax on land would be more efficient and possibly fairer than any other sort of tax. And I particularly wanted to pick on something. It was an oral discussion, and I might have missed something. But you said in terms of the site of high land prices in Palo Alto, you said it was due to improvements. But why are there improvements in Palo Alto? Because people desire to live there. So ultimately, it's a demand for the site value of land. As a result, people wish to live there, so they build houses and everything else, right? But it's ultimately driven by demand that pushes up the price of land, and people don't wish to live in the Nevada desert, and so therefore the price of land is rather low there. And I think you rather misrepresented, maybe unintentionally, but misrepresented the nature of a tax on site value of land.
But they don't want to live in Palo Alto because the weather's nice. They want to live
Well,
in
actually,
Palo
that
Alto.
is one reason why people want to live in Palo Alto.
It is, but that doesn't account for the outrageous price of the houses. The reason house prices are outrageous around here is people want. There's an agglomeration of cities. People want to be where all the other people are. Let's take Manhattan, where the weather's rotten. Why do people want to live in Manhattan on top of each other in little rat trap apartments and pay a huge amount? Because they're insanely productive when they're right next to other people. So Manhattan is pure land. But let me just, maybe for Adam Smith, our task is to raise something like 45% of GDP out of taxes. And I just don't think there's any hope of raising, so government spending in the US at all levels, federal, state, and local, is now 45% of GDP. So someone somewhere is paying 45% of GDP in taxes. And if you add in all those hidden taxes I talked about, so you're overpaying for health insurance to cross-subsidize, that's really a tax. We're easily in European levels, 50% of GDP. I don't know how you can raise 50% of GDP in a land value tax.
May I come back very briefly? One argument could be at least to shift the taxation towards land, right? At the moment, it's taxation very little
But,
on land.
isn't that, we have property taxes, so how?
No. We have property taxes are based on the value of the property, not on the value of the land.
But in Palo Alto, the value of property is like 90% of the value
But,
of
yeah,
the
but
value of the
there's
land.
nothing like the taxation of land values in Palo Alto. The other thing is, of course, which you didn't mention, is of course restrictions on land, on building in this neighborhood, which raise prices of houses. I mean, there's a lot more we could say, and I don't want to take.
No, that's exactly right. The value of the land is a completely artificial value because it is the value of having gotten through the regulatory hoops that it takes in order to build a house. And boy, that stretches the Adam Smith concept of here's this fixed factor that's not produced. It's an entirely it's like the value of land in Palo Alto is like the value of a subway token in of a taxi token in New York City. It's an entirely artificial scarcity driven by regulatory constraints. Well, I must say I'm delighted. I have not had a good debate on the land tax following this for a long time. Yeah, one more.
I don't know if I can be the last person to ask questions. You talk about stop competition among banks, and also mentioned about 0% checking account. And I want to ask, how can you tell more about how to stop competitions? Because like I think that competition is like you cannot stop it. It's a different form of competitions, right? So can you tell more about it?
Well, so historically they did stop it for a long time.
Yeah.
And the government is very good at stopping, the same way until Uber came in, they had stopped competition for taxi companies and kept up, and that, that lasted 50 years. Now it took Uber, and that's kind of a parable. In the case of banking, for some reason everybody's all dewy-eyed about Glass-Steagall, but it did say banks may not offer interest on checking accounts, and if you try to offer interest on checking accounts, you go to jail. There's also, in order to open a bank, you need a bank charter. You need the government's approval. You can't just go do it. And they said no. They also said you may not open branches. A big reason for the U.S.'s fragile banking system is that you weren't allowed to open branches. That's a lot of what happened in the Great Depression. So when a bank fails, J.P. Morgan can't come in and buy up the assets and keep it going. So you needed the government's permission to start a bank. And if you start doing something that looks like a bank, you're going to jail immediately. So it took a long time to work around that. What happened was it fell apart in the 1980s because you can say you can't pay interest on checking accounts when there's no inflation. But then inflation got up to 10%, and interest rates on government bonds were up from 2 or 3% to 15%. So people were saying, I'm not going to keep my money in the bank at zero. I'm going to buy government bonds. And then the money market fund was invented. Oh, well, why don't I buy a whole pool of government bonds and you can have shares in this pool of government bonds? And people took their money out of the banking system just wholesale and put it into money market funds. And then the bank said, look, you've been telling us we can't pay interest, but we're just dying. Nobody's giving us money anymore. And so the government said, okay, you can pay interest. And
yeah, but
my point
is asking about competitions though. Like when people you cannot pay interest to people, but like when people just open an account, they the bank give a gift or give some incentives, or like if you're a customer of a bank, then you may enjoy free coffee. So this is a kind of an alternative competition still.
Yeah, but it's very inefficient, and the most important kind of competition is always entry. So when talking about competition, we always think about, how can we get the banks to compete with each other? The most important kind to remember, and you see this right around here. The most important kind of competition is not do Ford and GM in the 1950s work against each other. Is can Toyota come in and clean their clocks? And that was what was really hard in banking, and remains hard now. Jamie Dimon gave a beautiful speech. He said, "You know what? I've been complaining about Dodd-Frank all these years. I like Dodd-Frank. Why? Because we've figured it out. We have a $100 million a year compliance and regulatory department. No one can build this, where no one's going to come in and threaten us anytime soon. So the real kind of competition you need is new businesses coming in. You need A&P, which kind of put the mom and pop stores out of business, and then Walmart put A&P out of business, and then Amazon's putting Walmart out of business. That's how it's very unpleasant. Everybody hates it except the consumer who gets better stuff cheaper. And we need that in banking. And that's what fintech, I think, is trying to do, and good luck to them. Okay. Great. I'm much happier ending on competition rather than student loans.